want the gallery. I just want Jody. That's why I did speaker mode, but
I'm not
I
speaking right now.
But I'm speaking.
You could pin.
Oh, pins. Yeah, pins.
We could do it,
Pins. Yeah.
no,
Yeah, that's good. That's perfect. Okay. Okay. Well, welcome everyone. We're very excited to have a guest with us today, Jody May from Exodus World Services, and she's going to be talking about kind of the current situation in refugee resettlement. And we know there have been some changes in terms of policy, in terms of refugees and so forth. And I also wanted to let you know while you're all here that on October 22nd, which is a Wednesday evening, Exodus is going to be doing a refugee simulation experience, and it's going to be for the whole church. So we want as many people to get that on your calendar and plan to come, because it's, as I understand it, I haven't done it, so maybe you can explain it better than I can, but I think that they assign you a role in a family, and you kind of experience what it's like to be a refugee and all of a sudden be told that you have to leave your home and that you don't have much time to prepare and you have to figure out how to handle that. Is that a good?
You described it very well.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, good. So, Jody, I'll let you.
All right.
Just get started.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for being here this morning. I'm just honored and privileged to be here. Mark's has been a wonderful partner to Exodus for a long time, and I'm just really grateful for that partnership and grateful for the opportunity I have this morning to kind of update you on what's happening in refugee resettlement. There have been a lot of changes, and it can get really confusing, what's happening. So many things change, and it's hard to keep up with it. And so that's why we created this, because we had a lot of people asking what's happening in refugee resettlement, and we wanted to be able to provide some clarity on what's happening and answer questions. So at the end, I'll make for sure that we have time to answer any questions that you may have. But that's my goal here. And just to speak to the refugee journey simulation, it is an immersive experience, and so our team will walk you through the entire process, but you are put in a family group, and you're going to be asked to imagine, to step into a refugee's shoes and imagine what that journey is like. And in doing so, we hope to build empathy so that when we have volunteers that are working with refugees, they don't see them as the story in the news, but have more of a connection, a personal connection of understanding what the refugee has gone through. And refugees often, because their journey is a journey that's filled with a lot of pain and loss and trauma, it might not be something that they want to revisit or talk about. And so as a volunteer, as just fellow human beings here in the Chicagoland area sharing space with refugees, we can then have that opportunity to understand what their journey is by having that empathy and building that empathy in ourselves. So that's our hope with that. So we're excited to come back and be able to do that. So I'm going to share my screen and get some slides. Oh yeah, some of you is behind you. Sorry about that.
If you're more comfortable moving chairs in here or on the sides,
Space here.
there's space here and here. Don and Suzanne, if you'd rather move. Okay, you're good? All right.
So updates on refugee resettlement, that's what we're doing today. And again, I want to just reiterate that there is a lot of confusion. So if you've got questions, please ask them. Because I'll be honest, there have been times as things have changed that I've been incredibly confused as well. So ask those questions. We want to try to understand and navigate them. And I will tell you up front, if I don't know the answer, I'll be honest with you and I'll tell you I don't, but then I can get back to you with an answer later. All right, so before I give the updates, it's kind of important for us to know who we're talking about when I say the word refugee, because the language around immigration gets incredibly confusing. People might assume one thing about a category of immigration or a language that we're using, And so making for sure that we're on the same page is really, really important. Refugee can be used colloquially to just mean anyone who has fled any place for any reason, right? So, you know, if there's a fire in a building and an apartment building and the people in that building are staying in a temporary shelter, they might be referred to as refugees from that apartment complex. But here in the United States, under our U.S. immigration law, refugee is a legal term that describes a very specific group of people. And this definition of a refugee was established, first of all, by the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, or the UNHCR. That was back in the 1950s. The international community weighed in on that. And then in the U.S., it became part of our law here with the passage of the Refugee Act of 1980. So this definition has stayed the same since then, and it's this. A refugee is a person who has been forced to leave his or her homeland and is unable to return because she or he has experienced persecution or has a well-founded fear of persecution. Persecution can be related to race, nationality, religion, political opinions, or membership in a particular social group. Now, that's a whole mouthful, isn't it? So I don't expect anyone to remember that or be able to say it back later. So I'm just going to give you some of the kind of highlights from it to help it kind of stick in your brain. First of all, you see on that very first line that refugee is someone who is forced to leave their home. They have been forced, meaning that they're not like other immigrants who maybe have moved from one place to another because they had a job opportunity or there was family there, or it was a place that they wanted to live. A refugee was forced because it was no longer safe for them in their home country. Second of all, they were forced to leave their homeland. That means that they are outside of their home country. Many refugees are, first of all, internally displaced. That's not a refugee. That's called an IDP, or an internally displaced person. So an example of that would be like, I live in Zion. If for some reason it was unsafe for me in Zion and I reached out to the church here and said, hey, can you protect our family? And we came from Zion here to your church, I wouldn't have left my country, right? I would just be internally displaced. Many refugees will flee to different places within their country in hopes that that persecution will not follow them. But that persecution became so intense and so dangerous to their family that refugees have fled their home country. So they're outside of their home country in a second country. And then the reason why they have fled and are unable to return is persecution. Persecution is all refugees experience. They have experienced persecution, and that is the reason why they are fleeing. And that persecution has to fall under one of those 5 categories: race, nationality, religion, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. So that covers that definition. But there's a question that I often get, and that's people say, why is war not listed on there? And I actually agree, because that was confusing to me as well. When someone asks me about what I do, and I talk about Exodus and the work of Exodus and mention refugees, and let's say I'm in the grocery store, I'm not going to spew out this big definition of a refugee, right? I'll sound like a total know-it-all. No, I don't do that. My shortened definition is that refugees are people who are fleeing war and persecution. So I actually put the word war in there, but it's not part of the definition. So let me just explain quickly why war is not part of the definition. War in and of itself does not make someone a refugee, but the circumstances around war often lead to situations where different people groups or individuals are facing persecution. What has happened between Russia and Ukraine is a good example of this. Because Russia was attacking Ukrainian cities, the people in those cities, simply because of their nationality, their lives were in danger. So it's considered persecution on a large scale because of their nationality. So Ukrainians could make a refugee claim on the basis of their nationality. Same war, the Russians can't make that same claim. However, many in Russia are speaking out against what their government is doing, and that political opinion is putting their life in danger. And so they're fleeing and could make a refugee claim on the basis of persecution because of their political opinion. So I want to acknowledge that overly simplifying what's happening between the two countries, but in terms of persecution, I think it provides a good understanding, a good example of why war, not the war necessarily, but the circumstances of the war have created situations of persecution. Now, before I go on, because that's a lot of information, any questions on that definition or refugees?
Sure, so I know a couple things, so sexual orientation isn't in there, and I know that's a big reason people are persecuted.
That would be membership in a particular social group.
Okay, so that falls
Yep.
into there.
That category is a catch-all for all of those categories that you think of that don't fit into those other four.
Okay, the other thing was, economic, disaster, I think many people left Venezuela
Yeah.
because of just, economic, like grinding poverty or whatever. How does that fit in?
It does not fit into it.
Okay.
So under this definition of refugee and under the U.S. refugee resettlement, economic situations, unless there's persecution that's creating that. So let's say a group is targeted because of their race and they're not allowed to work in a country or it impacts them economically, that if it's tied to one of those 5 categories, then it could be a claim. But if it's like an economic collapse of a
But like
country.
starvation is not one of these categories.
Starvation isn't either, and that would then also be dependent on if it's connected to persecution.
Okay,
So in a country where maybe people are being driven off of their land, farming community, where they've been farmers for generations and they're being driven off of their land, that may create a situation where they are facing starvation. We see that a lot in some of the countries in Africa. And so that would be persecution. The starvation would be the secondary. But that leads to a category of immigration that is not refugee, and that would be asylum. And so those that are fleeing hunger, those that are fleeing economic situations, they could come to the U.S. and make a claim of asylum. But to make a claim of asylum, you have to be inside of the United States. You cannot make a claim of asylum from outside. Refugees are processed. Everything happens outside of the U.S., and then they are invited to come here.
so there were people from Venezuela crossing into the United States and immediately making an asylum
Yes.
designation, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
all right.
Interesting.
I'm just building on George's comments about migration, like I've heard forced migration, and that's also like climate migration. That's going to become a big
Yes.
trend. And so there's not like a persecutor, it's these huge forces
Yes.
that cause drought and famine and
Yeah.
disease. And
Yeah.
so
So currently, climate is not a category that's recognized here. However, there is some activity happening towards that where people are advocating for the different circumstances around climate change to be included. But as of right now, it isn't.
And that would that be a United Nations,
That would be a
decision?
United Nations decision. Yeah.
Mhm.
The term well-founded fear
Yes.
has endured for decades in terms of that those words are the criteria internationally for what creates a refugee, and they're internally true for asylum seekers. That has to be documented.
Yeah.
Before the label fits,
So what you're saying is like, I could feel right now that I have a fear of persecution in the U.S. because of my political beliefs, but proving that it's a well-founded fear would, if I want to go to Canada or whatever,
Mhm.
that would be the
Yeah.
criteria. It
Yeah.
can't just be, oh, well, she's kind of,
She's a little paranoid.
yeah, right.
Yeah, Jane, thank you for pointing that out, because that is a key part of it. It has to be a well-founded fear. And that means that they undergo numerous checks. Those are both interviews. Those are also biometric checks. It's through different databases. Those interviews have to be consistent between different interviewers to make for sure that that story that they are saying, their reason why they have that well-founded fear, that it can be proven and that there's no hold in that story. And then to add to that, that process that they go through is so intense. It generally takes 1.5 to 2 years to go through that process. After they've gone through that process, they wait even longer until one of the countries that welcomes refugees invites them to come and resettle there. So for us, it would be the U.S. And that vetting is so intense that refugees are the most vetted people entering the United States, meaning that our government knows more about refugees than any other category of immigration that's coming into the United States. And the key part, I mentioned it earlier, but they are invited to come here. So they don't make that choice, they're invited by our government to come here.
If they're invited to come here,
Mhm.
does the government then help them?
Yes.
Is that one of your slides?
Yes, the government does help them. There is, yes, thank you. We're doing that segue there. The government does invite them, and the government does help them when they arrive, but that's actually one of the things that has changed. So I will address that in just a little bit, all right?
Yeah.
So I have a video I'd like to share with you. I know some of you were at our Celebration of Hope this year, so this is a re-watch for you. This is a video that was shared there, but these are two refugee children. They both just started their freshman year of high school just this month. And it's Rush and Mohammed, and both of their separate families came to the U.S. as refugees, and so they're talking a little bit about their story and some of the numbers around refugee resettlement.
Millions of people around the world are forced to flee their homes due to war or persecution.
But who are the world's refugees?
I am a refugee.
I am a refugee.
We flee from countries in conflict all around the world.
We are families.
About half of us are children.
My family fled Burma.
My family fled Syria.
We don't want to leave our homes, our countries.
We don't want to leave everything behind.
We run to save our lives.
After we flee,
our journey is just beginning.
We can wait decades in a refugee camp,
hoping to return home,
or for a new country to invite us in.
The process of resettling in America
is the hardest in the world.
Before being invited to the U.S., we were vetted by at least 8 federal agencies.
Our documents,
biodata,
and fingerprints were screened.
We went through lengthy interviews
and medical checks. We must rebuild our lives
with determination and hard work.
We are here legally.
We go to school,
hold jobs,
and pay taxes. We even pay back our travel costs to America.
A refugee's journey is not easy.
But we are courageous.
We are resilient.
We have goals and dreams. Most of all,
we are enriched by new friendships.
And we hope to enrich our new communities with the experiences we bring to share.
We are the world's refugees.
We are the world's refugees. We seek not just a place to live,
but a place to belong.
So it doesn't matter how many times I've watched that video. When I hear them say that we seek not just a place to live, but a place to belong, it gets me every time, because that's what I want. I need a place to live. I need my home. I need beds for my children. I need food in the fridge. I need all of those things that create a place to live, right? But if we stop there, we're missing a huge part of what it means to be a human in community, right? Our refugee friends seek not just a place to live, but a place to belong. And that's not unique to refugees. That's all of our experience. You're all here today in community, right? This is a connection. You knew each other's names. You're saying hello. And if you didn't, you introduced, which was fun to find out May and I share a name. My last name's May and her first name's May. We find connections with people. That helps us to have a place to belong. And that's the heart of what Exodus does. We want to help our refugee neighbors know that they have people here in their community that want them to feel connected and to know that they belong. All right, so let me just cover a couple of those numbers. 36.9 million is the number of refugees in the world today. Those are people that the United Nations has counted, and that's the official number from them, 36.9 million. You also heard 17 years. That's the average amount of time that a refugee is displaced. And that number is because of this percentage. Less than 1% of refugees are resettled annually. That means 99% of them will wait another year and another year waiting for a new place to call home. So because of that, not every refugee will ever be resettled. So that 17 years takes into account kind of the short end of waiting, which would be going through that vetting process in around 2 years, all the way through there are refugees who are literally living out their lives in refugee camps, hoping for a new place to call home. All right, so that's where we're at right now with resettlement, or the definitions and understanding it. And the question that we're here for today, what is going on with resettlement? Now, it's helpful if, before I give you the updates, I help you understand what the process typically looks like. This is a process that has existed for years and years, established in that Refugee Act of 1980, that still exists. So I have a visual up there that I'm just going to kind of go through quickly. In that upper left-hand corner, we see a boat there arriving on a shore. We see a family who is fleeing. Of course, not every refugee flees by water. Some flee by foot, some flee on other forms of transportation. But we see there that they're fleeing because of persecution. As you go down that path to the right, we see the family sitting there with tents in the background and waiting. And so in that, we are representing that refugee camp where they're spending their time waiting. Again, that's often around 17, the average is 17 years. And that might be in camps like we picture with the UN white tents with the blue logo of the United Nations on there. Or it can be even in urban settlements that are inside of cities. So it doesn't look the same in every place. Off to the right, we see two options that do not lead to resettlement. And so that would be staying and returning. So staying, that would mean staying in that country. That'd be similar to the US with our asylum here, where someone has arrived. But we're talking in another country where the refugee has fled to. Sometimes if their language or their customs are similar to that country they've arrived in, they might be allowed special permission to then be a part of that new country that they have arrived in. But for the vast majority of them, they are not going to be allowed that opportunity. And then we see returning, meaning returning home. Sometimes a change in power can lead to a situation where they can return home. We're seeing this actually right now in the country of Syria. Syria underwent a civil war inside their country, and many refugees fled. We had teams from Exodus that were visiting refugees who had fled over the Syrian mountains into the Bekaa Valley of Lebanon, where they were waiting there in refugee camps. There has been a change in power. There's some question as to whether that change in power is going to be positive for Syria, but some refugees have made that decision to try to return home, to be a part of that rebuilding effort, especially if they've been waiting now over a decade in the refugee camp. They may have made that decision. But oftentimes, those changes in power are not happening. And if they do, it's a long way down the road. And so those are not generally options that are available for refugees. So then we see the path continue, and we see the family standing in front of a series of desks. That's that vetting process. So any refugee that's going to be resettled in the U.S. has to go through this rigorous vetting process, and they have to pass every stage. That's why we represented it by many different desks. A lot of people question, well, what if they don't have the proper documentation at one point? Or what if their story of that well-founded fear ends up having a hole in it? That means that they will continue to wait. They will not continue on to the next process until they pass every stage of that vetting process. Once they pass through all of that vetting, then they wait some more. until they receive an invitation to resettle into the United States. So they receive an invitation. So then they have a flight. That flight is coordinated by the International Organization for Migration. It is a loan and must be paid back by the refugee. Then you see the door there, that's their arrival. They are legally arriving here in the United States, and they receive intensive case management from a resettlement agency for their first 90 days, with some services and assistance that do last beyond the 90 days. But those resettlement agencies contract with the federal government to provide that intensive case management for 90 days. And then you have Exodus there, where we connect with them. So that's where our volunteers, we mobilize, train, and support volunteers to welcome and befriend refugees when they're here, helping them to be connected to their community and to rebuild their lives. So this is how the Refugee Resettlement Program currently should be working. This is how it has worked for years. But this is where
Sorry.
yes,
Can I ask a quick
yes,
question before
absolutely.
everyone?
Yes, please do.
Is the vetting done by the UN, or is it done by each individual country that might take the refugees?
It's done by both. So the UN does the initial screening to make for sure they meet that definition of a refugee, and then they are referred to the countries that do resettle refugees. So they would be referred to the U.S., and then while they are waiting in the refugee camp, that vetting process would take place. So for
Can
us,
they get referred to multiple countries?
possibly, yes.
Okay.
So that vetting process is across 8 federal agencies here in the United States that take care of that vetting process while they're waiting in the refugee camp. Yes.
No, you're saying they could be in the refugee camp for 17 years.
They could be in the refugee camp for longer than 17. That's
So
the average.
Is it set up like a little town, or what, do the kids go to school and?
It looks
Sure.
different in the different places where refugee camps are set up. If a recent crisis is happening that is forcing people to, forced migration was the term that you used over there, forcing them to leave their home countries, oftentimes it is very quickly set up, and so there wouldn't be those things. But as those refugee camps become established, yes, community does start to be established within the refugee camps, especially those that have been, those camps that have been there for decades. An economy of sorts grows up in there. Schooling, medical care, things like that are most often provided by non-governmental organizations or nonprofits that come in to help and assist with that.
Jody, I
Yeah.
just want to talk to,
Yeah.
we hosted a family from Sudan, Somalia. The parents were old teenagers. They were 19, maybe not even that old. They had been born in that camp to their parents. And now they were starting a 3rd generation in the camp. So that just speaks to how long they can be waiting.
Thank you
Wow.
for sharing that.
Wow.
Yeah. And particularly in those camps in Africa, there have been people that have been in those camps for a very, very long time. All right, so I'm going to keep this visual up there because I think it's helpful to know what part we're talking about. So on January 20th, there were a lot of executive orders that were signed. One of those executive orders suspended the Refugee Resettlement Program for a 90-day review, and it's a continual 90-day review, meaning every 90 days it's to be reviewed. A report is to be submitted by the Secretary of Homeland Security and the Secretary of State. The first 90 days was Easter Sunday, just happened to fall on Easter Sunday. So just that's helpful context to know how long ago this was. If a report was submitted, it was not made public, but the Refugee Resettlement Program has remained suspended. We've now passed the second 90 days. Again, if it was submitted, it wasn't made public, resettlement remains suspended. And so we are in the 3rd set of 90 days and resettlement remains suspended. And so that was on January 20th. So with that executive order, it meant that even flights for those refugees who had gone through the whole vetting process, had been invited to the U.S. and were scheduled to come and had their flights booked by the International Organization for Migration, those were canceled. For us at Exodus, we had 3 families that were supposed to be arriving on February 3rd. That was the closest that we had to that January 20th date. That was a very hard day when we had to let their families hear. Those were all people who were being sponsored. So they had family and friends here who had sponsored them. We had to let them know that those flights were canceled. And so those were canceled, and nothing more has happened with those. On January 24th, so that same week, the resettlement agencies, Exodus is not a resettlement agency, that would be that lower left-hand corner. Those are the organizations that partner with the federal government to provide those case management for refugees when they arrive. We partner with those organizations. They received stop work orders that basically told them they would not be reimbursed for the case management for the refugees who had already arrived, who were still within that 90 days. So that happened on January 24th. The agencies had an urgent response to that, trying to gain additional funding from donors, switching around some of their staff to be able to cover it. They did a tremendous job. Exodus also had an urgent response so that we could support our resettlement agency partners and the refugees that they were serving. Some of you were involved in that urgent response. And so those refugees that were here, things looked a little different for them, and there were some delays and things, but all of them did receive that support that they needed during that initial 90 days. On February 26th, there were funding freezes for the resettlement agencies, and their contracts were canceled. So it wasn't just the stop work orders at that point, it was the contracts were canceled.
Wow.
On February 7th, I have to look at my notes for these. On February 7th, there was an executive order that asked the Secretary of State to consider a separate pathway for resettlement of Afrikaners, which is a people group within the country of South Africa. And so those are all the executive orders that happened with that. A little bit of an update on what has happened with that. The resettlement program remains suspended. However, the contracts with the resettlement agencies has been reoffered to them. Of the 10 national agencies, 8 of them agreed to re-sign those contracts. 2 of those agencies decided that they would no longer partner with the federal government in refugee resettlement. We also have seen that executive order to explore resettlement of Afrikaners, that has proceeded, and there have been just under 100 Afrikaners who have been resettled under that new resettlement program. None of those have been resettled here in Chicago, so none of our volunteers are working with those South Afrikaners. There are 2 other places where refugees have come. One of them is that there is litigation in a case called Pesito versus Trump. And in that case, there was an injunction for those refugees who had already been approved for resettlement. Now, this is a large number, including those 3 families that I said on that first week of February. There have been a handful, and I don't have the exact number because that information is not readily available, but there have been a handful of cases that have come through because of that injunction on the Pesito versus Trump case. But it is a very, very small number, like probably under 20, that have come through. None of them were cases that Exodus knew that were paused. One of them was Pesito on the case, so that is the name of the plaintiff in that case, and Pesito's case was processed and his family arrived. And then there's another pathway that is open that was never shut down, and that is for Afghan SIV holders. SIV stands for Special Immigrant Visa. Special Immigrant Visa holders are those in Afghanistan or Iraq that helped our troops. The U.S. made a promise to them that that assistance ever put their life in danger, that the U.S. would offer them safety here in the United States. So if they have already received their SIV, that means they have a stamp in their passport that has approved them, then they can come to the United States. However, when you look at this, the visual up there, that middle part of the processing has been paused because of the suspension. And so they're only processing a handful of people that don't yet have their SIV stamp. But the way that they were resettled, because they do come under our refugee resettlement program, their flight was a loan that was coordinated by the International Organization for Migration. That is no longer happening. And then being matched with a resettlement was not part of the process anymore either because of the cancellation of those contracts. And so SIVs have been coming to the United States, but it's been because of volunteers. So there have been veterans groups that have said these people worked alongside of us and we made a promise to them. So they have raised funds to help pay for the flights for those SIV holders to come here. And then private sponsorship groups have been then welcoming them and providing that case management for them when they arrive. Similar to what Jane and John, what you have done in the past with sponsorship. And so for context, last year, Exodus welcomed, through refugee resettlement, 650 families that our volunteers were involved in welcoming. Since January 20th, we have only had arrivals of those SIV holders, and there have been 11 families that we have welcomed. So when I say it's small, it is very small for those families. It makes a difference for them, and we are so thankful that those families have came, but our hearts are also mourning the fact
Is it
that
650 people or families?
Families, 650 families.
Families, so you're down to 2%.
Yes. Yeah, very, very low. Yeah.
Is the Department of State the one that issues the contract, is the department?
Is it the Department of State that issues the contracts? That has switched. There has been movement. I don't know that I should speak to this. There has been movement to where the Office of Refugee Resettlement is being housed, whether it's there or under, whether it's under there or under DHS, I believe. Don't quote me on that. I would encourage you to look that up. But there has been shifting with the reorganization of the State Department. So parts of it are under there, but parts of it have been moved.
How are the organizations nationally like yours and the on the ground ones staying in business? How are they able to?
That's a great question. So Exodus is privately funded. We are a nonprofit. And so our donors have continued to support the work that we are doing with the refugees that are already here and a handful of arrivals that we have. For our agency partners, the reduction in funding has been incredibly difficult for them because the contracts have been reinstated. Currently, they are receiving some of that funding, but they have had layoffs. They have been able to hire some people back, but we do not know if this will continue or if the numbers will continue to be low. So it has been a challenge financially for those resettlement agencies. And for Exodus, we don't rely on that government funding. So it has not impacted us financially in the same way that it has the resettlement agencies. Yes, sir.
Have there been litigation filed to settle whether it's a power of Congress or the executive orders?
That is a case that is currently happening. So there was a preliminary case that was in Washington where there was the preliminary injunction, but then just last week the case was moved to its full case, and that's happening in California, and that's called Pacito versus Trump. So that is continuing, and they're exploring whether or not the injunction from the earlier case, if that can still stand. But the injunction has been largely ignored.
Are other countries as difficult as the United States currently is to accept refugees? Is this like a worldwide issue, or is this just us?
So it is us. However, the U.S. has historically led in refugee resettlement. We have been the global leaders, setting the example of how to welcome and how to welcome well. Our refugee resettlement program works very well, and other countries have emulated that. With the reduction in numbers, and when we saw reduction in numbers a few years back, we saw that other countries then followed that lead of the United States and reduced their numbers as well. We also saw other countries that then surpassed the U.S., which we're going to see, other countries that are surpassing the U.S. So the last time our numbers were brought low, they were not, stopped to the point that they've been stopped this time around, but Canada became the country that was welcoming more refugees instead of the US. All right. Any questions?
I have a question about, so there was a lot of, coverage at the time about the Afrikaners who
Yeah.
came. Have they been in a refugee camp? Did they go through
Great
this
question.
long vetting process?
That's a really
Because
great
it
question.
seemed at the time that they were kind of fast-tracked. That's what I kind of heard.
They were.
What she said. Yes.
Yeah, I read the
So-
article in the paper.
So,
Yeah,
so
right.
the question is about the Afrikaners and what their processes look like. There
Mhm.
has not been a lot of transparency about what that process has been. There is on the U.S. Embassy website for South Africa, there is now a better explanation of what is happening. But the Afrikaners are able to apply while they are still in country, still in their homes. So they have not even fled from their homes. They have not fled from their country. Some of them may have. It
But
is
that's
possible that they
that's
have.
very different than that first definition that you gave us of a refugee,
Yeah.
the United Nations,
Yeah, which,
definition.
under the Refugee Act of 1980, it does give discretion for the president to identify, under that Refugee Act of 1980, to identify people groups that are in need of prioritization. So it's under that they're able to be prioritized. But the process that they have gone through it has been much faster than refugees. The first flight of Afrikaners that arrived here, they traveled on a chartered flight here to the United States, which is significantly different than how refugees come over. So there have been a lot of significant differences in how they have been processed. I'm not an expert in South African history and situation. I mean, we all know some of that, right? And so there is some disputing as to whether Afrikaners are facing persecution, if it hits that threshold of being persecution or not. There have been horrific stories of things that have happened in South Africa, but that also has been with Afrikaners, and it has been with other populations as well. My understanding is that South Africa has a really large crime problem, and the data on who that impacts has raised a lot of questions.
So the question in terms
Yeah.
of these executive orders
Yeah.
pausing, do you see that, do you see them being removed and that refugees will start coming back? And if so, when? Or
Great
you just
question.
have no idea?
The best thing to say is I have no idea, but I can speculate here
Sure.
too, okay?
Please do.
So, the question, I don't know if I need to repeat for those online, is with the executive orders, do we see that lasting long term, or when do we see that coming back? There is, in the end of the fiscal year and the new fiscal year starts October 1st. And so by that date, the president is to issue the presidential determination on refugees. This is also referred to as a refugee.
Yeah, well, she apparently representing some organization called Exodus.
Yes, I am.
This is because there are people
Coming in.
coming in.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Perfect. And so, the presidential determination is referred to as a refugee ceiling, meaning that all of us right now, we fit under this ceiling, right? None of us are too tall that we can't fit into this room. So any number below the refugee ceiling is acceptable, all the way down to 0. 0 is acceptable under that ceiling. Many people have advocated for there to be a refugee floor, meaning a number that we have to reach. So that there's some, but that has not happened so far. But there's been a lot. I would be an advocate of putting a refugee floor on there. But that number is to be released in the next couple of weeks. So there's been some speculation as to what that would be. Some people have speculated that it would be zeroed out. But in recent reporting, which of course this is all speculation, in recent reporting, it has been that it'll just be set at a lower number with a focus perhaps being on those Afrikaners, prioritizing their resettlement. Yes.
We were, when I was much younger, they were close to a family, John John Clayton, who was a writer for the Chicago Tribune.
Okay.
And also wrote the second book for the state of Illinois. He put that together. And he and his wife, who was Estonian, brought a huge number of Estonian individuals. I don't know if they were families or not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because after World War II, Estonia was absorbed by the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
And so there were, I would assume, refugees who were brought here to escape the
Yeah.
political situation.
Yeah. I have another question.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
who covers the cost of the refugee camps?
Who covers the cost of the refugee camps? That is from UN supported countries. So the countries that are part of the United Nations, they support the cost.
And so anybody in a refugee camp has their living expenses covered, really. I mean, they're not able to work in those camps, right?
Sometimes they are able to work. Sometimes the refugee camp does allow them to leave if the country that's hosting them allows them to come and go. But in most cases, no, they're completely dependent on the leadership of the refugee camp to provide for those needs. Yes.
I'm just, have a learning curve on
Mhm.
some of the ways in which this works and.
Can you speak up just
sure,
a little bit?
In terms of understanding the migration versus
Yes.
refugee
Yep.
kind of processes, and I was just thinking about how decades ago, the states of Minnesota and Wisconsin accepted to be among kind of recipient community states, and
Yeah.
I'm sure there are others like in Oklahoma. There was an example in Ohio. There was a Caribbean population, like
Right,
Haitian.
Haitian.
Yeah. And so I'm just trying to understand this federal, is the gateway.
Yep.
But then when they place either refugees or migrants,
Yeah.
can states, like we say we're a sanctuary city in Chicago and probably we're a sanctuary state. How can you say you want to receive the refugees or migrants, which are not refugees, and become like a hub to take huge populations?
Yeah. So the states don't have any say over whether or not they can receive refugees or not. We did see some states where governors issued statements after some events had happened overseas where they said they would no longer welcome Syrian refugees. That was largely just publicity because the governors don't have any power to say that they will or they will not because it's a national program. But they are resettled into those states by the decision is made between the local refugee coordinator in that state and the Office of Refugee Resettlement. So they make those decisions together as to where they'll be resettled. And those populations where you see that there are larger populations, that is taken into consideration. So in those communities that you're talking about, a lot of those may have come through refugee resettlement, but some of them are also people who have migrated for other reasons.
John, I'm gonna stop you because we have to sign off right now. So because I see everything happening there.
I will hop off of this
And-
and I will
Did you have any other,
answer questions though.
did you have any other slides
So
or?
the last thing I wanted to share is that all feels very heavy, but I do have reason for hope. There were over 40 members of Congress that signed on to a letter urging the administration to restart the refugee resettlement program. World Relief had a Christian statement on refugee resettlement that was signed by tens of thousands of Christian leaders and Christians representing all 50 states. I have hope because the U.S. is still welcoming. Through the SIV holders are still allowed to be open. That could have been shut down and that still remains open. I also can have hope because even with the Afrikaners and the questions that we have about it, we see that resettlement can happen and it can actually happen quickly. So perhaps that could be used in other categories. Maybe I'm dreaming, but we're proving that it can be done. And so I also have hope because I see people like you that are wanting to learn, that aren't shutting down in the midst of all of the chaos that we hear and see. And we have people that are still committing to welcome and to be a part of those families that are already here. And so our need for volunteers still exists because we want to support those refugees that are already here, who are even more confused than we are about what's happening, because they're like, wait a minute, does that, what I just heard on the news, does that impact me? And so having caring volunteers that are visiting them and helping them acclimate to their new life is more important now than ever. And so thank you. I'll stick around to answer questions though, but I think I got a lot up here.
Yeah, right. And I think, some of you may know this too, that Hannah Luna, Seth's wife, was volunteering in Heidi House in Wheaton, and now, is working for Exodus. So just thought I'd mention that. We have somebody, so you know,
Does she attend church here?
yes.
I did not realize that.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah,
Somehow I missed that part of the story.
She's well, they got married in July, but they're getting married.
Okay, yeah.
In 2 weeks.
All right.
And Seth is our, music director.
Oh, got it.
And Hannah, I thought maybe Hannah would be here today, but, she's not, so.
That's
Yeah,
wonderful.
so,
I actually
yeah.
haven't met her yet because I was out of town taking my son to college, so I was out of town.
Okay.
But I'm gonna be doing her onboarding this Wednesday. So
Yeah, there you go.
It's
Yeah.
been encrypted into the flyer.
Oh, yeah? Oh, yeah, she's out in the choirs, that's the deal, okay.
Yeah.
To certain occupations, such as engineer or doctor or something like that.
Does it prioritize?
Advantage to refugees.